My mother and sister excluded me from family inheritance and convinced everyone I was money hungry, but when my father's secret will appeared, their true colors showed. I, 29F, never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after everything that's happened in the past few months, I need some perspective from people who aren't connected to my life. My father passed away 8 months ago after battling pancreatic cancer. He was only 62, and his death devastated our family, especially me. Dad and I were incredibly close. I was always Daddy's little girl, even though I hate that term. Growing up, my household consisted of my dad, Mom, 58F, and my older sister Emma, 34F. On the surface, we looked like the perfect suburban family, but the dynamics were complicated. Emma was always my mother's favorite. They shared the same interests, had similar personalities, and were practically joined at the hip. Meanwhile, I was more like my father, practical, straightforward, and interested in science rather than fashion and socializing. This dynamic wasn't particularly problematic during my childhood. Yes, there were moments when Emma would get preferential treatment, but Dad always made sure I felt loved and supported. He attended all my science competitions, helped me with my projects, and was my biggest cheerleader when I decided to pursue a career in environmental science. After college, I moved a couple of hours away for work but visited home frequently, especially after Dad's diagnosis 2 years ago. I took as much time off as possible to help with his care, often driving back and forth multiple times a week to be there for him. Emma, who lives just 20 minutes from our family home, visited occasionally but was too busy with her real estate career and social life to help much with Dad's care. Mom seemed to accept this without question, often making excuses for Emma while simultaneously criticizing me for not being around enough despite my efforts. When Dad passed, I was devastated. We had countless heart-to-heart conversations during his illness, and I genuinely thought I was handling his affairs according to his wishes. About a month after the funeral, Mom called a family meeting to discuss the inheritance. I wasn't expecting much. Dad had a modest life insurance policy, the family home, mostly paid off, and some retirement savings. Nothing extravagant, but enough that it should have provided some security for Mom while leaving something for Emma and me. At this meeting, Mom and Emma presented me with a document they claimed was Dad's will. It left virtually everything to Mom, with a specific stipulation that Emma would inherit the house after Mom's passing. I was mentioned only as a recipient of Dad's collection of science books and his old watch. That was it. No funds, no property, nothing else. When I expressed shock and confusion, Mama and Emma immediately became defensive. They accused me of being greedy and only caring about money. Mom said, "Your father knew Emma would need more support than you," implying that my stable career meant I didn't deserve an equal inheritance. Emma went further, suggesting that since she had been more present during Dad's illness, a complete lie, it made sense that she would receive more. The whole situation felt wrong. Dad had always been fair and had specifically told me during several of our private conversations that he wanted his assets divided equally between Emma and me after providing for Mom. When I mentioned this, they both accused me of making it up and trying to manipulate the situation. The following weeks were awful. I tried to speak with the attorney who supposedly handled the will, but he was actually a friend of Emma's and refused to discuss the details with me. When I pushed back, Mom and Emma started telling extended family and friends that I was causing drama over the inheritance and only cared about money. They painted me as the greedy daughter who abandoned her family and then came back demanding cash after Dad died. People I had known my entire life began treating me differently. My aunt, Dad's sister, called to express her disappointment in me. Cousins sent messages saying they never expected me to behave this way. Even a couple of my childhood friends reached out to say they were surprised I was fighting with my family over money so soon after Dad's death. I was devastated. Not only was I grieving my father, but I was also losing my family and reputation. I decided to step back and sought grief counseling to help process everything. My therapist suggested that perhaps the will was legitimate and I needed to accept it, even if it didn't align with what I thought Dad wanted. For 3 months, I tried to repair my relationship with Mom and Emma while accepting the inheritance situation. I visited, called regularly, and even helped Emma with some repairs at her apartment. But something still felt wrong about the whole situation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Dad's true wishes weren't being honored. Update 1. 2 weeks ago, everything changed. I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a note from my father, dated 2 months before his death, along with copies of his actual will and several other legal documents. Dad's note explained everything. He had suspected that Mom and Emma might try to circumvent his wishes regarding the inheritance. He had overheard them discussing how they would handle the will situation when they thought he was asleep. So, he secretly met with an attorney, a legitimate one, not Emma's friend, and created a proper will and trust. The legitimate will was vastly different from what Mom and Emma had presented. It provided for Mom with a life estate in the family home and a monthly allowance from his retirement accounts. The remainder of his estate was to be divided equally between Emma and me, with the stipulation that neither of us could access our full share until Mom either passed away or remarried. More shocking was the inclusion of a USB drive containing audio recordings. Dad, ever the practical thinker, had recorded several conversations with Mom and Emma where they explicitly discussed cutting me of the inheritance and creating a fake will. In one recording, Emma suggested they could just say he was on heavy medication and changed his mind if I questioned anything. The law firm had been instructed to wait 3 months after Dad's death before contacting me, giving me time to see how things played out. Dad's note apologized for putting me through this but explained that he wanted to protect me and ensure his wishes were respected. I was stunned. I felt vindicated but also deeply hurt. The father I adored had known his wife and other daughter would betray not only me but also his wishes, and he had to make secret arrangements to prevent it. It was heartbreaking. After consulting with the law firm, I decided to confront Mom and Emma. I invited them to lunch, thinking a public setting might keep things civil. It didn't. When I presented the legitimate will and mentioned the recordings, Emma immediately accused me of forgery. Mom burst into tears, creating a scene and claiming I was trying to steal what rightfully belonged to them. I kept my composure and explained that I wasn't interested in taking anything from Mom. The legitimate will actually provided her with more security than their fake one. I just wanted Dad's wishes to be respected and for my share to be acknowledged. They both stormed out, and within hours, my phone was blowing up with messages from family members. Once again, Mom and Emma had gone on the offensive, now claiming I had created false documents to challenge the will, and was trying to leave Mom homeless. The accusations were absurd, but people were believing them. I decided enough was enough. With the law firm's guidance, I filed to have the legitimate will recognized by the court and sent cease and desist letters to Mom and Emma regarding their defamatory statements. I also forwarded copies of some of the recordings to key family members, including Dad's sister, my aunt, who had been particularly vocal in her disapproval of me. The fallout was immediate. My aunt called me sobbing, apologizing for believing the worst of me. Several cousins and family friends also reached out with apologies. Mom and Emma, however, doubled down, now claiming Dad wasn't in his right mind when he made the recordings and that I had somehow manipulated him during his illness. The matter is now headed to probate court, and I'm preparing for an ugly legal battle. Part 2. My attorney assures me that the legitimate will and the recordings provide strong evidence of Mom and Emma's deception, but the process will be lengthy and painful. I've started seeing my therapist twice a week to cope with this additional trauma on top of my grief. Some days, I wonder if I should just walk away and let them have everything to avoid the ongoing conflict. But then I remember how Dad went to such lengths to protect me and ensure fairness, and I know I have to see this through, not for the money, but for him. Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and things have escalated dramatically. The court date was set for 2 weeks from now, but before we could get there, Mom and Emma made their next move. Last weekend, I arrived home from grocery shopping to find my apartment had been broken into. Surprisingly, nothing valuable was taken, not my laptop, TV, or jewelry. Instead, the only things missing were the original copies of Dad's letter and will, though the law firm has the originals as well, and, most distressingly, a special box of mementos from Dad that I kept on my bookshelf. This included childhood cards, notes he had written me during his illness, and a special compass he had given me when I graduated college with the engraving "Always find your true north." I immediately filed a police report. While the officers were sympathetic, they explained that without witnesses or clear evidence, it would be difficult to prove who was responsible. However, the timing and targeted nature of the theft seemed too coincidental. The very next day, Emma posted on social media about finding some of Dad's personal items that he had supposedly wanted her to have all along. The post included a photo of my compass. When I commented that the compass was stolen from my apartment, she quickly deleted the post, but not before several mutual friends had seen it and taken screenshots. I provided these screenshots to the police and my attorney, who filed an emergency motion with the court. A judge granted a temporary order preventing Mom and Emma from selling or disposing of any of Dad's possessions until the will matter is resolved. This seemed to enrage them further. Emma showed up at my workplace, creating a scene in the lobby and telling anyone who would listen that I was trying to steal her inheritance and destroy the family. Security had to escort her out, and my boss, who has been surprisingly supportive throughout this ordeal, suggested I take a few days off to deal with the situation. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother's brother, Uncle Phil, who I hadn't spoken to in years due to a falling out he had with Dad. Surprisingly, he was calling to warn me. According to him, Mom had called him in distress, accidentally revealing during their conversation that Emma had indeed broken into my apartment to reclaim what should have been hers. When Uncle Phil questioned the legality of this, Mom had hung up on him. Uncle Phil also shared something I hadn't known. Apparently, a similar situation had occurred when my maternal grandmother died 10 years ago. Mom and her sister had allegedly altered their mother's will to exclude Uncle Phil, which led to their estrangement. He had never pursued legal action because he valued his peace more than the inheritance, but he regretted allowing their behavior to go unchallenged. This new information provided context for Mom and Emma's actions but made the betrayal cut even deeper. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, it was a pattern of behavior that predated Dad's death. With Uncle Phil's permission, I shared this information with my attorney, who suggested we depose him for the upcoming court case. Uncle Phil agreed, further solidifying my position. In response to these developments, my attorney advised filing a restraining order against Emma due to her workplace outburst and potential involvement in the break-in. I was reluctant, despite everything, she's still my sister, but after giving it careful thought, I went ahead with it. The temporary order was granted, providing some much-needed peace. Meanwhile, family members have continued to reach out after seeing the evidence I shared. Most have been supportive, but a few remain firmly in Mom and Emma's camp, convinced that I'm the villain in this story. The family is essentially split in two, with holiday gatherings and future family events now in question. Throughout all this, I've been trying to focus on healing and remembering my dad for who he was, not for the drama that followed his death. I've created a small memorial corner in my apartment with photos of us together and the few mementos that weren't stolen. On particularly difficult days, I sit there and try to channel his strength and integrity. The court date is approaching quickly, and my anxiety is through the roof. My attorney is confident, especially with the new evidence of the break-in and Uncle Phil's testimony, but I know the road ahead will be painful for everyone involved. Update 3. The court date finally arrived. I was an anxious wreck the night before, barely sleeping and constantly reviewing documents with my attorney via text. When I entered the courthouse, I spotted Mom and Emma with their attorney in the hallway. Emma glared at me, while Mom dramatically turned away, dabbing at non-existent tears with a tissue. I maintained my composure and kept my distance as advised by my attorney. Inside the courtroom, things moved more quickly than I anticipated. The judge, a no-nonsense older woman, had clearly reviewed all documents beforehand and seemed unimpressed by the theatrics from Mom and Emma's side. When their attorney tried to paint me as a money-hungry daughter who had manipulated my dying father, the judge cut him off and asked for concrete evidence rather than character attacks. The turning point came when my attorney played excerpts from Dad's recordings. Hearing his voice filled the courtroom with an eerie silence. In the clearest recording, Mom and Emma could be heard explicitly discussing how to modify Dad's will, with Emma saying, "She doesn't need to know. We'll just tell her Dad changed his mind at the end. She wasn't here enough to know any different." Mom's face paled as her own voice echoed through the courtroom. Emma stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Their attorney requested a brief recess, which the judge granted. When we returned, their tone had completely changed. Instead of fighting the legitimate will, they now claimed there had been a misunderstanding and that they had been confused about Dad's wishes due to the stress of his illness. Their attorney proposed a settlement that would essentially honor Dad's legitimate will while avoiding any penalties for their attempted fraud. My attorney advised accepting this, pointing out that while we could push for penalties, it would extend the legal battle and potentially reduce the estate through legal fees. After careful consideration, I agreed to the settlement with one additional condition, a formal, written acknowledgement from both Mom and Emma that the will they had initially presented was not legitimate. The judge approved our settlement, and just like that, the legal battle was over. In the hallway afterward, I expected some kind of reconciliation attempt, an apology, an explanation, anything. Instead, Mom walked past me without acknowledgement, while Emma paused only to say, "I hope you're happy now," before following Mom out. Outside the courthouse, Uncle Phil was waiting. He had testified earlier and stayed to hear the outcome. He gave me a long hug and told me Dad would have been proud of how I handled everything. It meant more than he could know. That evening, I received a text from Mom that simply read, "The house keys are under the mat. I'll be staying with Emma until I find my own place." No apology, no explanation, nothing else. I went to the family home the next day to find it half emptied of belongings. Most of Mom's personal items were gone, along with several pieces of furniture and artwork that had been specifically mentioned in Dad's will as staying with the house. My attorney advised documenting everything but suggested that pursuing these relatively minor items wasn't worth the continued conflict. I reluctantly agreed and spent the weekend cataloging what remained. Being in the family home without Dad was painful enough, knowing that Mom and Emma had stripped it out of spite made it almost unbearable. A week later, I received a formal letter from Mom's new attorney outlining her expectations for the monthly allowance specified in Dad's will. Part 3. The letter was cold and transactional, as if we were business associates rather than mother and daughter. I forwarded it to my attorney, who handled the arrangements without requiring further involvement from me. Since then, communication has been minimal and strictly related to legal and financial matters. Mom hasn't asked how I'm doing or expressed any interest in reconciliation. Emma blocked me on all social media and apparently told mutual friends that she no longer has a sister. It's painful, but in a strange way, also clarifying. The masks have completely fallen away, and I can now see our family dynamic for what it always was. The most unexpected outcome has been the reconnection with Dad's side of the family. My aunt, Dad's sister, has been incredibly supportive, inviting me for weekly dinners and introducing me to extended family I rarely saw growing up because Mom always claimed they didn't like her. It turns out they were just kept at a distance because they saw through some of Mom's manipulations and had tried to warn Dad early in their marriage. As for the inheritance itself, it's far less significant than the relationship damage. I've decided to use a portion of my share to establish a small scholarship at Dad's alma mater for students interested in his field. He would have liked that, I think, turning something painful into something positive for others. 3 months have passed since the court ruling, and I'm slowly finding my new normal. Grief counseling has been essential, helping me process not only the loss of my father but also the effective loss of my mother and sister. My therapist says it's normal to grieve these relationships even though Mom and Emma are still alive, and she's right, it feels like another kind of death. Last week, I finally felt strong enough to sort through the box of Dad's possessions that the attorney had been holding for me. Among the items was a journal Dad had kept during his illness. In one of the final entries, he wrote, "I worry for my daughter after I'm gone. She has always seen the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. I hope my actions will protect her not just financially, but will also finally show her the truth she's been too kind to see on her own." Dad was right. As painful as this journey has been, it revealed truths I needed to see. I'll always miss the family I thought I had, but I'm gradually making peace with the reality of who they actually are. And in honor of Dad, I'm trying to maintain my capacity for seeing the best in people, just with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries. Final update. It's been 6 months since my last update, and so much has changed that I barely know where to begin. I want to thank everyone for the supportive messages and advice. They've been a lifeline during the darkest moments of this journey. First, the practical matters. The inheritance has been fully settled, with the house now legally in my name, with Mom's life estate rights as Dad intended. I've moved into the family home, partly because my apartment lease was ending, but mostly because it felt right to preserve Dad's space rather than selling it immediately. Being surrounded by his things brings both comfort and pain, but the comfort grows stronger each day. Mom did find her own place, a luxury condo that, interestingly, costs considerably more than the monthly allowance Dad's will provides her. When I asked my attorney about this, he suggested that Mom likely had financial resources I wasn't aware of. This led to another discovery. Mom had apparently been maintaining a separate bank account for years, one that Dad had no knowledge of. According to Uncle Phil, this account contained money from my maternal grandmother's estate, money that should have been partially distributed to him. The revelation didn't surprise me as much as it once would have. As for Emma, she's maintained her distance, which has been a blessing in disguise. The restraining order expired, but I haven't renewed it since she's shown no interest in contacting me. Through mutual connections, I've heard she's planning to move across the country for a fresh start with her boyfriend. I wish her well, even though I doubt she would say the same for me. The family division has largely solidified. Holiday celebrations were awkward this year, with relatives essentially forced to choose sides. Thanksgiving saw 2 separate gatherings, one at Emma's place with Mom and their supporters, and another at my aunt's house with Dad's side of the family and the few relatives who have maintained relationships with both camps. I opted for the latter and found more healing and genuine connection than I've experienced at family gatherings in years. The most unexpected development came from a distant cousin on Dad's side who works in mental health. After hearing my story, she gently suggested that my mother might have narcissistic personality traits, and that my family dynamic showed signs of the golden child/scapegoat pattern common in such families. This led me down a research rabbit hole that has been simultaneously painful and illuminating. So many aspects of my childhood that I'd normalized suddenly made sense through this lens: Mom's constant comparison of Emma and me, the shifting standards of behavior, the way Dad often ran interference between Mom and me. I brought these insights to my therapist, who has been helping me reprocess my childhood memories with this new understanding. There have been moments of attempted reconciliation. 2 months ago, Mom called out of the blue, her voice unusually soft, asking if we could put the past behind us and be a family again. The conversation seemed promising until she added, "After all, we've both lost something from this whole mess. I think we're even now." That statement, equating her deliberate deception and emotional manipulation with my justified legal response, told me everything I needed to know about her perspective. She wasn't seeking reconciliation, she was seeking to re-establish the prior dynamic where her behavior went unchallenged. I politely told her I wasn't ready for that step, and we haven't spoken since outside of necessary financial communications. The most healing aspect of this journey has been discovering who my true support system is. Friends who initially pulled away due to Mom and Emma's manipulation have reached out after learning the full story, though some relationships remain irrevocably changed. New friendships have formed, particularly with people who have experienced similar family trauma and understand the complex grief I'm navigating. I've also developed a stronger relationship with Uncle Phil, who recently shared family photos and stories from before I was born. It's been wonderful learning about Dad's younger years from someone who knew him as a brother rather than a husband or father. These stories have helped me feel connected to him in new ways. As for my own path forward, I've made some significant decisions. I've accepted a new job that allows more remote work, giving me flexibility to travel and create the life I want rather than remaining tethered to the location of my fractured family. I've also started volunteering with a grief support group for young adults who have lost parents, finding purpose in sharing my experience to help others feel less alone. The journals Dad left behind have become a treasured resource. I read entries on difficult days, finding new insights and occasional moments of unexpected humor in his observations. In one of the earliest entries after his diagnosis, he wrote, "The strangest gift of terminal illness is perfect clarity. Suddenly, you see people exactly as they are, without the filters of hope or expectation. Some revelations break your heart, while others restore your faith. The trick is knowing which ones to focus on." I'm trying to follow his wisdom by focusing on the revelations that restore faith rather than the ones that break hearts. It's not always easy, but I'm making progress. The pain of losing my mother and sister while they're still alive has not disappeared, but it has evolved into something more manageable, a dull ache rather than a sharp, constant pain. To anyone facing similar family betrayal, I can't promise that everything will work out perfectly. Some relationships may be permanently altered or lost. But I can say with certainty that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you relationships, brings a different kind of peace that's worth fighting for. Dad knew that. In his final act of protection, he gave me not just financial security but the push I needed to see the truth and value myself enough to stand firm in it. For that gift, I will be eternally grateful.